We are taught from like a really young age that pain is the ultimate enemy. We treat it like a disease, right?
Oh,
It's this
absolutely.
invader. It's this foreign contaminant that enters the body or the mind. And I mean, our only logical directive is to fight it off and eradicate it as quickly as possible.
Right, get it out of your system.
Yeah, get it out. But what if getting cured is actually your worst nightmare? What if you are secretly, desperately holding on to your deepest, most agonizing memories because you are just absolutely terrified of who you would be without them?
It completely flips the script on how we view mental and emotional health, doesn't it? I mean, we assume everyone wants to be happy,
Naturally, yeah.
but the reality of human emotion is far more tangled than that. Sometimes sadness is not an invader. Sometimes it is the actual house we live in.
Wow. The house we live in.
Yeah, and asking someone to leave that house, even if the roof is literally caving in, is asking them to step out into this terrifying void.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a truly fascinating psychological text today, one that functions as kind of an emotional X-ray,
A really precise X-ray.
very precise.
Right.
And the source of this X-ray is incredibly specific. We're looking at an extensive analysis of the song Lithium
Mhm.
by the band Evanescence. Now, right off the bat, let me be very clear about our mission today for you listening.
Yeah, this is important.
We are not doing a pop culture retrospective. We're not reviewing the album. And we are absolutely not having a medical discussion about pharmaceutical interventions or actual clinical medication.
I'm really glad you clarified that,
Yeah.
because the source material we're examining today takes this piece of music and treats it purely as a psychological map.
Right.
It isolates the lyrics and the tone to explore a very raw, very messy human condition.
Exactly. Our mission is to trace a very specific yet incredibly universal narrative flow that this text maps out. We are tracing the journey from being completely trapped in your own pain all the way to the incredibly fragile, highly complicated process of emotional liberation. We are looking at how a person breaks out of a prison that they themselves have learned to love.
The core conflict driving our source material today is what the text identifies as the terrifying intimacy between sadness and identity.
Terrifying intimacy. I love that phrasing.
It's profound, right? It explores what happens when a person doesn't simply suffer from sorrow, but actually uses it as the foundational material to build their sense of self.
Yeah.
It's when pain ceases to be just a symptom you're experiencing, and it becomes your memory, your personality, your atmosphere. And strangely enough, it becomes your primary form of love.
Okay, let's unpack this because
Okay.
honestly, when I first read the notes on this, I was a little skeptical. It's a massive, heavy concept.
It is a lot to take in at first glance.
It is. But the deeper I got, the more it resonated. And I promise you, the listener, that by the end of this deep dive, we are going to ground these abstract ideas. We are going to break down this journey step by step so that you will have a concrete guide, a real framework for navigating your own internal healing journeys.
That's the ultimate goal here.
Right. But to understand how to get out of this metaphorical prison, we first have to understand exactly how the prison was built.
And that construction project always starts with a foundational wound. If we look at the origins of the pain described in this narrative, it subverts our usual expectations.
How so?
Well, usually when we think of deep trauma or profound sorrow, we picture a massive, explosive event, a loud, dramatic, plate-smashing breakup.
Right, like a massive, undeniable betrayal where someone clearly wronged you.
Exactly.
The cinematic movie moments, right? Someone throws a drink in someone's face or there's a screaming match in the pouring rain.
Yes, exactly that. But the relationship beneath this narrative is not about an explosion at all. It's actually about emotional starvation.
Emotional starvation.
The text notes that there is a profound, aching human absence inside this experience. It maps out a situation where someone simply failed to love clearly, where someone left the room cold.
Wow.
It's a profound abandonment that happens while the other person is still physically present in the room.
Which, I have to say, is so incredibly insidious. I was trying to wrap my head around this feeling, and it's almost like, well, okay, imagine you are freezing to death in a room,
Okay.
and the heater is physically present. It's sitting right there in the corner. You can see it.
But it's just unplugged.
Exactly. It's unplugged. You are right next to the source of warmth, but you are still shivering.
Hmm.
And I think that raises a huge question for me, and probably for anyone listening who's been in that situation.
It's a question.
Why is this quiet, invisible form of abandonment, this unplugged heater, so much more destructive to a person's ego than a loud, obvious betrayal? If someone screams at me, I'm devastated, but I know they're the villain. Why does the quiet absence hurt worse?
Because of how the human brain processes information, let's look at the mechanics of this. With a loud, explosive betrayal, say, someone cheats on you or screams that they hate you and walks out the door, the threat is external and obvious.
Right.
The narrative is basically handed to you on a silver platter. They did a bad thing to me. In that scenario, you can access anger.
Oh, yeah. Lots of anger.
And neurologically, anger is a highly activating, externalizing emotion. It pushes the energy outward. It tells your nervous system, fight the threat.
So anger is actually protective in that scenario.
Highly protective. It separates you from the abuser.
Yeah.
But emotional starvation, that's an absence. It is literal nothingness.
Just avoid.
And the human brain is a meaning-making machine. It fundamentally cannot process nothingness. It abhors a vacuum. So if the brain is faced with a cold room, it scrambles to fill the void with an explanation. It has to figure out why the heater is unplugged.
To make sense of the cold.
Precisely. And the text points out the brutal psychological truth of how we make sense of it. The abandoned person does not naturally default to blaming the person withholding the love.
Which is wild, right?
It is, but instead they internalize the defect. They blame themselves for needing the warmth in the first place.
Wow.
The fundamental question they ask is not, what is wrong with them for not plugging the heater in? The question immediately becomes, what is wrong with me?
Like, why am I so unlovable that even the person sitting right next to me on the couch won't look at me?
Yes. They look at the absence of love and interpret it as a reflection of their own lack of worth. From a professional standpoint, this mirrors early childhood attachment wounds perfectly.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, a child whose parent is emotionally neglectful won't think, my parent has unresolved psychological issues preventing them from nurturing me.
Right, a 5-year-old doesn't have that vocabulary.
Exactly. A child thinks, I am bad, and therefore I do not deserve to be nurtured. The speaker in this narrative is experiencing that exact same dynamic. They grieve not just the loss of the partner's love, but they grieve the version of themselves that kept desperately waiting to be chosen.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. The other person's inability to express love becomes a personal wound that the speaker internalizes as a fundamental flaw in their own character. And that internalization is the cement foundation of the prison.
Because once you believe that you are fundamentally flawed, you stop looking for the exit. You think you deserve to be in the cold room.
Yeah.
And this leads us directly into a concept the source material calls the melancholy trap. This is the core psychological architecture of the entire narrative. It's the concept of literally falling in love with your own sadness.
Yes.
Now, I want to pause here and make sure we don't lose anyone. Because if I'm explaining this to a friend, or say a student trying to grasp these concepts, the immediate pushback is going to be, why on earth would anyone fall in love with their own pain? That sounds completely counterintuitive to survival.
It does sound counterintuitive, until you understand the function the pain is serving. We don't fall in love with pain because it feels good. We fall in love with it because the pain becomes evidence.
Okay, break that down. Evidence of what?
Evidence that the love was real. Evidence that you matter. Look at it this way. If it hurts this much, it must have meant something profound.
Right.
If it still hurts today, months or years later, then the love you felt still exists today. It hasn't vanished into the nothingness.
Okay, I see.
If the love still exists, maybe you are not completely alone. You end up holding on to the pain because the pain acts as a proxy for the person who abandoned you.
Oh, wow. So the pain is actually a stand-in.
Yes. What's fascinating here is how the researcher makes a point about this. The text describes how the sorrow in this narrative becomes sacred, and it explicitly clarifies that the sorrow doesn't become sacred because sadness is beautiful or romantic or poetic.
Right, it's not like a moody Tumblr post.
No, not at all. It becomes sacred because it is the last remaining object in a room where absolutely everything else has been taken away.
That visual is just staggering. Let me try to put this in everyday terms for you listening. Think of someone who keeps rereading old, painful text messages from an ex at 2 in the morning.
We've all known someone who does that.
Or we've been that person. Or someone who keeps a box of old photos under the bed and deliberately looks at them when they feel lonely, knowing it's going to make them cry. We see this all the time, right? If we use the text's metaphor, it's like sitting in a completely empty, freezing apartment. The furniture is gone, the art is off the walls, the person you loved has walked out the door for good. The only thing left in the entire room is a heavy, dark block of lead sitting on the floor.
Right.
That block of lead is your sadness. Now, you could throw the lead out the window. But if you do, the room is completely, 100% empty. And to the human mind, total emptiness is infinitely more terrifying than a heavy block of lead.
Exactly. So you guard the lid.
You polish it.
Yeah.
You build your entire daily routine around checking on it, because it is literally all you have left of the experience.
And this brings us to the profound contradiction that creates the tension in the song and in anyone going through this process. The emotional architecture here is built on a massive cognitive dissonance. Well, the speaker desperately wants a release from the crushing weight of this lead block. They know the darkness is destroying their life, but simultaneously, they are utterly terrified of that release. Because that same darkness is their proof of depth, it's proof of feeling. If they throw the lead out the window, they are left with a terrifying sterile void.
Which means taking the pain away isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's an existential threat.
Exactly.
If someone tries to take away my sadness, they're trying to take away the only proof I have that I love someone. And that exact fear is what the source material captures when it dives into the first major metaphor of the deep dive, which is the title of the song itself, lithium.
Yes. And we need to reiterate, just to be crystal clear, that in the context of this psychological mapping, lithium is not a literal medical reference.
Right.
We are not discussing bipolar disorder or the actual efficacy of mood stabilizers. The text uses lithium as a powerful, potent metaphor for emotional containment.
So what does it represent for the speaker?
It represents the deep, paralyzing fear of being stabilized into emotional neutrality. It is the fear of becoming clean, calm, highly functional, but entirely emptied of intensity.
This is the ultimate paradox of the healing process.
Huh.
You want to survive.
Yeah.
You do not want to drown in the pain anymore. But you also look at the normal world, and you do not want to become emotionally sterile.
Right.
I was trying to figure out how to explain this fear of the cure. It's almost like, okay, imagine art restoration.
Oh, I like this.
You have this beautiful centuries-old painting. Maybe it's a masterpiece, but it's been in a smoky room for 200 years, so it's covered in this thick layer of soot and grime. It's so dark you could barely make out the figures.
Okay.
You want to see the painting, so you bring in the harsh chemical solvents to clean it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this terrifying moment right before you apply the chemical. What if the solvent doesn't just strip away the dirt? What if the chemical is so strong that it strips away the original paint too? You're terrified that if you undergo the cure, you will be left with a canvas that is clean, perfectly sanitized, but totally blank. You fear losing the art along with the dirt. Is that what this fear of emotional neutrality is like?
That is a brilliant way to visualize it because it hits on the exact neurological fear the text is describing. The text explains exactly why this fear of the blank canvas exists.
Why is it?
For some people, and very clearly for the speaker in this narrative, sadness is not just an isolated emotion that happens to them. It's not a passing storm. It actually becomes the texture of their world. It provides contrast.
Right.
The source uses this incredibly striking phrase to describe it. It says, sadness turns memory into cathedral light.
Cathedral light, that is, wow. I mean, just as a phrase, that's beautiful.
It's a gorgeous phrase. And think about what cathedral light actually is.
Yeah.
It is not the bright, flat, blinding light of a hospital room or an office building. It is light that filters through thick, stained glass. It creates deep shadows, rich, moody colors, and a sense of profound, heavy reverence. It makes everything in the room look sacred and important. Healing the metaphorical lithium in the mind of the speaker threatens to shatter that stained glass and replace it with fluorescent bulbs.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yes.
Under the fluorescent bulbs, you can see clearly now. You won't trip over the furniture. You are, quote-unquote, functional. But the magic, the depth, the reverence, it's completely gone.
Exactly. So in a shocking reversal of how we normally view mental health, healing actually feels like imprisonment to this person.
Wait, I have to push back here because this is where the everyday listener might get lost. We usually say pain is the prison and healing is freedom.
Right.
Are you saying the speaker feels like getting better is a cage? Isn't that just romanticizing depression? At what point is this just wallowing instead of this sacred survival you're describing?
It looks like wallowing from the outside, absolutely. But neurologically, inside the person's brain, it is a genuine crisis of regulation.
Okay, explain that.
It is not romanticizing depression so much as it is a terror of dysregulation. Let me explain. The speaker feels that healing will lock them away from the profound depths of their own feelings. They resist being locked inside a state of emotional neutrality because their nervous system has adapted to extremes.
Adapted to extremes.
Yes. If you take away the soaring highs of intense, chaotic love, and you take away the crushing lows of devastating grief, what is left?
A flatline.
A flatline. And to a heart that is used to beating wildly, to a nervous system that has been running on the adrenaline of trauma and grief for years, a flatline feels like death.
Wow.
The brain associates intense feeling, even painful feeling, with being alive. Neutrality feels like a void. They want peace, yes, but not at the cost of losing the darkness that made them feel real.
So the fear of the cure is so strong, the terror of the fluorescent light is so intense that the speaker constantly retreats back into the darkness they know. They would literally rather feel the crushing weight of the lead block than feel nothing at all. Which completely explains why people go back to toxic relationships, or why they purposefully trigger their own sadness. And that dynamic brings us to the second major metaphor we need to dissect today: the ashes.
The narrative eventually moves toward the motif of ashes, but the researcher makes a crucial, highly specific distinction here. The ashes in this text are not presented simply as a symbol of destruction or an endpoint.
Right.
They are presented as a place of return. It is a habitat.
Yes, the source points out something so simple but so striking. Ashes are what remain after something is burned completely to the ground. They are not fire anymore. They cannot keep you warm. But they also can't burn you anymore.
Exactly.
But their primary function, psychologically, is that they are undeniable, physical proof that a fire happened.
And this realization shifts the entire atmosphere of the narrative. The text emphasizes that this is exactly why the song feels distinctly Gothic rather than merely sad.
Let's drill down into that word Gothic. Because when people hear Gothic, they think of teenagers wearing black clothes or, heavy eyeliner and rain falling outside a dramatic window. What does Gothic really mean in a psychological context?
In this context, it is not an aesthetic choice. It is a psychological environment. Gothic literature and Gothic themes, think Wuthering Heights or Edgar Allan Poe, are heavily focused on the romance of ruin.
The romance of ruin.
Yes. It is an exploration of decay, of ghosts, and of the lingering, heavy presence of the past dominating the architecture of the present.
Right.
The text frames it perfectly. This narrative is not about someone crying in a brightly lit, modern, sterile room. It is about a person standing in the blackened ruins of a burned-down house, surrounded by ash and actively recognizing the shapes of the burned furniture. The dark, Gothic atmosphere is crucial because it illustrates how ruin becomes a familiar, almost comforting environment.
Comfort in ruin. That is so deeply tragic. It's the person who refuses to move out of the apartment they shared with their ex, even though every corner of the room makes them miserable. So what does this all mean for the person trying to heal? I guess the question I have, and the question anyone watching a loved one go through this has, is why do we keep going back to the burned down house?
That's a great question.
If we know it is destroyed, if we know the heater is permanently unplugged and it is just cold ashes, why not just pack up, walk away, and build a new house in a new town?
Because fundamentally, identity is built out of survival. The text explains that the speaker keeps finding their place in the ashes because they know how to exist after a collapse. Think about the incredible, almost superhuman amount of psychological energy it takes to survive a devastating emotional fire.
It's exhausting. Just thinking about it is exhausting.
It takes everything you have. You have to learn how to breathe through the thick smoke. You have to learn how to navigate the falling debris of your life. You have to learn how to bandage your own third-degree emotional burns. Over time, you become a master expert in surviving disaster.
You adapt to the hellscape. It's like, okay, think of a deep-sea creature.
Oh, this is a good analogy.
One of those strange bioluminescent fish that lives at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. It has adapted over millions of years to survive under the crushing, unimaginable physical pressure and total darkness of the ocean floor.
Right.
Now, if you suddenly take that creature and bring it up to the surface, into the warm, beautiful sunlight and normal air pressure, it doesn't thrive. It literally explodes. It dies.
Because it's not built for that environment.
Exactly. It needs the crushing pressure of the deep to physically hold its body together. The speaker in the song needs the crushing pressure of the ashes to hold their psychological identity together.
That is a perfect biologically sound metaphor for trauma adaptation. You learn how to kneel in the remains of your life and make a solid identity out of what survived the burning. You become the survivor. You become the one who endures.
Yeah.
That is a very powerful, very solid, and very protective identity. If you leave the burned down house and walk out into a sunny, green, peaceful field, all of those hard-won survival skills are suddenly completely useless. You do not know who you are in a green field. You don't know how to navigate peace.
Wow.
You only know who you are in the ashes. It is a masterclass in how our environment, no matter how toxic, dictates our internal state.
And if you don't know who you are in the green field, stepping into it feels like dying.
Uh,
Which brings us to a section of the text that completely stopped me in my tracks. Because it flips absolutely everything we assume about the goal of getting better. If identity is built in the ruins, then leaving the ruins isn't just scary. It feels like a moral failing.
This is what I consider the most profound psychological revelation in the entire source material. The psychology of healing as betrayal.
I want to spend some real time on this because I think this is the hidden hurdle that trips up almost everyone trying to recover from grief or trauma.
Let's unpack the mechanics of it. The text states that the true subject of the narrative isn't just emotional dependency on another person. And it's not even just dependency on the feeling of sadness. It is a profound, deep-seated dependency on the self that the pain created.
The self that the pain created.
Yes, it is the hidden terror of letting go. When we experience profound, long-lasting pain, we don't just feel it as a passing state, we become it.
Right.
The text breaks down how this identity forms over time. The suffering self feels profound. The broken self feels honest. The grieving self feels fiercely loyal.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but also really difficult to confront. If the suffering self is profound and the grieving self is loyal, that means the healed self feels like a traitor.
Yes, exactly.
Let's round this. Imagine a widow who has been mourning her husband for 5 years. She's built her life around being the loyal, grieving widow. One day, she goes out to lunch with a friend and she genuinely laughs. A real deep belly laugh. And immediately, what happens?
The guilt sets in.
She feels a crushing wave of guilt. Why? Because if she is laughing, she feels like she is admitting that her husband's death doesn't matter anymore. By feeling okay, she feels like she is saying, oh, I guess I didn't love him that much after all, since I'm fine now. By healing, you feel like you are actively betraying the version of you that loved them so deeply.
That is exactly the dynamic. This is why the complexity of recovery cannot be overstated, and why we shouldn't rush people through it. Healing is morally complicated in the mind of the sufferer.
It really is.
The speaker in this narrative is not just trying to release physical or emotional pain. They are facing the agonizing existential task of essentially killing off the identity they built around that pain. To let go of the sorrow feels like letting go of the person you were when you loved them, and nobody wants to murder their past self.
No. It is psychological self-amputation. You are being asked to cut off the limb that holds all the memories of the love you lost. And you're being asked to do it willingly, which makes you feel incredibly guilty. You look at the ashes and think, how can I just walk away and abandon the remains of this thing I held so sacred for so long?
It's a misdirected loyalty. The loyalty to the pain is a stand-in for loyalty to the lost love and to the lost self. And the tragedy is, as long as that loyalty remains unquestioned and unexamined, the person will remain forever trapped in the cold room. They will keep guarding the block of lead.
So how do we break the loop? Because we know the song and the psychological map we are tracing doesn't end with the speaker just sitting in the ashes forever. After wrestling with the fear of the lithium numbness, after finding the gothic comfort in the ruins, and after battling the intense, paralyzing guilt of feeling like a traitor, the narrative does finally reach a climax. There is a moment of leaving.
There is. But it is crucial to know how the text describes this climax because it actively rejects the Hollywood version of recovery. It points out that the end of this journey is not a clean, sweeping recovery.
Right. There is no triumphant, victorious leap into the sunshine. The music doesn't swell with a major chord. There's no superhero landing here.
Thankfully, no.
We don't get a training montage of the speaker throwing all their dark Gothic clothes into the trash and running barefoot on a sunny beach.
Because that would be entirely inauthentic to the depth of the psychological journey we just mapped out. To go from the Mariana Trench to the beach instantly would kill the organism.
Exactly.
The text beautifully details this final reading of the narrative. It describes the climax as a moment of profound, almost glass-like fragility. The true revelation, the actual turning point of the song, is simply the moment the person realizes the full scope of what their sadness has become.
What does it become?
They realize it has become a lover, a prison, a mirror, and a language. And realizing the absolute totality of that dependency is the only key to escaping it.
That makes perfect sense. You cannot dismantle a prison until you have run your hands over every single inch of its walls and mapped its exact dimensions. And the source gives us this incredibly poignant, deeply cinematic final visual.
It's a powerful image.
It describes a person standing inside the darkness, touching the walls of their prison one last time. It is a moment of whispering to the room that both kept them alive and kept them completely trapped.
The final words of the text capture the essence of this fragile piece beautifully. I know you, I loved you, but I cannot stay here anymore.
I know you, I loved you, but I cannot stay here anymore. It gives me chills because it completely changes the paradigm of healing. It is not a violent rejection of the past. It is an acknowledgement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, and even touch lightly on Jungian concepts of the shadow self, this is the ultimate goal of psychological integration.
Tell me more about that.
Well, true liberation does not require hating your past pain. In fact, if you try to hate your pain or violently push it away, you're just creating more friction and conflict within your own nervous system. True liberation requires acknowledging that the pain served a vital purpose.
It kept you alive.
It kept you alive. It gave you an identity and a shape when you had absolutely nothing else. It was the heavy block of lead that tethered you to the floor and kept you from floating away into the terrifying emptiness of the void.
But you are respectfully declining to let it dictate your future. You are thanking the ashes for holding the memory of the fire. You are acknowledging their validity, but you are deciding that you need to go somewhere where you can actually be warm again. You are deciding to plug the heater back in.
Precisely. It is a profound realization of self-compassion.
Yeah.
You finally understand that sometimes we do not cling to sorrow because we secretly want to suffer. We cling to it because it is the very last place where we still recognize ourselves. But you reach a point where recognizing yourself in the dark is no longer enough to sustain a life. You have to be willing to not recognize yourself for a little while. You have to be willing to step into the terrifying, unknown fluorescent light or the green field in order to discover who you might become next.
Wow. Let's just synthesize the journey we just traced because it is an incredible, exhausting, but beautiful arc. We started in a cold room, exploring the devastating emotional starvation of a love that was present but unplugged.
Right.
We saw exactly how the human mind internalizes that neglect, asking what is wrong with me, and falling into the melancholy trap where pain becomes the only reliable evidence of love.
We then examine the terrifying fear of the cure, using the metaphor of lithium to represent the existential dread of emotional neutrality. We saw how the loss of the cathedral light that sadness provides makes healing look like a threat rather than a rescue.
We stood in the Gothic ashes, understanding how human beings find genuine comfort in ruin because it is familiar. We looked at the deep-sea creature and how we build our entire identity out of the skills that help us survive the collapse.
We confronted the psychological terror of healing as a form of moral betrayal, the agonizing guilt of letting go of the self that the pain created, and the fear of amputating our own history.
And finally, we reached that incredibly fragile, quiet moment of stepping out. Not with a triumphant shout, but with a whisper, touching the walls one last time, acknowledging the protection the prison provided, and saying a gentle goodbye.
It's a beautiful progression.
As I promised at the very beginning of this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a concrete guide, a highly practical exercise based entirely on the psychological mechanics we just unpacked.
I think it is essential to take these dense, abstract concepts and apply them directly to the reality of lived experience. Insight without application is just trivia.
Exactly. So here is the exercise for you. I want you to think of a pain, a resentment, or a deep sadness that you've been holding on to for a very long time.
We all have one.
It could be an ex, a failed career path, a friend who betrayed you, something you logically know you should let go of, but you just haven't been able to. Now, instead of doing what we normally do, which is trying to aggressively fix it, or berating yourself for still feeling it, or trying to violently push it out of your mind, I want you to try visualizing it as a physical room, exactly like the metaphor in the text.
Construct a literal space in your mind's eye.
Yes. Walk around that room in your mind. Look at the walls. Look at the ashes on the floor. Feel the cold air. And then I want you to actively acknowledge that this room, as dark and cold as it is, protected you.
It really did.
It gave you a place to exist when you were at your absolute most vulnerable. It gave you a profound, loyal identity when you felt abandoned. I want you to actually say thank you to the room.
This is the practice of radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance. And then once you have fully acknowledged its value and its protective function, practice whispering that final line to it. I know you, I loved you, but I cannot stay here anymore. Notice how giving the pain permission to have existed and giving it respect for the heavy lifting it did to keep you alive suddenly makes it so much easier to turn your back and walk out the door. You aren't fleeing a monster. You are just moving out of a house you've finally outgrown.
That is a profoundly effective, neurologically sound way to approach emotional transition. It lowers the defenses of the nervous system. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you walk out of that metaphorical room today.
What's that?
It builds on everything we've discussed. We have seen how our deepest pains and our darkest rooms are often the master architects of our most profound empathy, our depth, and our identity. We build incredibly complex, resilient selves in the ashes. So the provocative question is this. If your pain was capable of building such a profound, deep version of you in the absolute, what new, equally profound, and completely unimaginable identity might be waiting to be built in the vast, empty space left behind once you finally step out of the ashes and into the light?
What an incredible question to leave off on. You are not losing your identity by leaving the pain. You are just clearing the plot of land for a new architecture. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It was a heavy one, but I think a truly necessary one. Be gentle with yourselves out there, be incredibly patient with your own healing processes, and remember that it's okay to touch the walls one last time before you leave. We'll catch you on the next one.